Welcome to Rambam In-Depth. Today we're going to be discussing the Rambam in Hilchos Temurah, Perek Aleph, Halacha Aleph, the very beginning of Hilchos Temurah. Temurah is a prohibition in the Torah, where the Torah forbids us from taking the holiness of one animal designated as a sacrifice and transferring it to another animal. And if you did that, your efforts were not successful because both animals remain holy. Ha-yahu smarasa yeh it, and the animal that you exchange it for remain holy. So the Rambam says as follows: Kol ha-meimer leika, whoever does this act of Temurah incurs the penalty of lashes. And the Rambam uncharacteristically asks a question: Va'aval pi shelo yasa ma'isa, even though there's no action involved, Temurah is mere speech. And we know that any law, any negative commandment that doesn't have any action, there are no lashes. So the Rambam answers that question. Mepi Shmuel lamdu, there's an oral tradition that was passed down from which we had learned. Shekol mitzvahs leitasa she'ein ba ma'isa ein leiken alav. That any negative commandment that does not involve action, there are no lashes. Chutz, there are exceptions. Menishba, when someone swears falsely, even though it's only verbal. Umeimar, someone who makes Temurah, that we just discussed. Umakawal is chaveira b'shem, or someone who curses his fellow using God's name. Shleish alav in elu efshashiyah behen ma'isa klal. These three negative commandments cannot possibly involve any action; they're only speech. V'loiken aleim, but there are lashes for these three prohibitions. These are exceptions to the rule. This the Rambam takes from the Gemara in Temurah, Daf Gimel Amud Aleph, quoting Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Rabbi Yossi Haglili, that all negative commandments that have no action we do not incur lashes, with the exception of these three, Temurah being one of them. So Rabbi Yochanan clearly seems to accept the idea that Temurah is considered to not have any action. The problem with that is Rishonim asked that in Bava Metzia, the Gemara, Daf Tzadik Amud Beis, talks about the prohibition of muzzling an animal before it threshes or during its threshing. You're not allowed to do that. And if a person does that, the Torah administers the penalty of lashes. So the question is, what happens if you cause the muzzling of the animal to occur through speech, through sound? Rabbi Yochanan says, Leika, you get lashes. Rish Lakish says, no, you don't get lashes because there's no action. Rabbi Yochanan says there is action because akimas piv havamaisa, movement of the lips, constitutes action. So we see clearly that Rabbi Yochanan holds that speech is also action. So why is Temurah any different? So the simple explanation is that Rabbi Yochanan himself qualifies the thing of Temurah, where he says that's not one of the three exceptions. Why? Because according to Rabbi Yochanan, speech is also considered action. But the problem is the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Schiras, Perek Yud Gimel, rules like Rabbi Yochanan with regard to the muzzling of the animal with sound, with speech, that the person does incur lashes. Why? Because the speech is considered to be action. And yet here in Hilchos Temurah, the Rambam says clearly that Temurah is lav she'ein bei ma'isa. It doesn't have any action. Nevertheless, there are lashes, but it has no action. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, and the Rambam rules in a favor of Rabbi Yochanan in Bava Metzia, with regard to muzzling. So how could he say over here Temurah has no action? The Lechem Mishnah in Hilchos Sanhedrin gives a very sound answer. He says as follows: why is it that Rabbi Yochanan holds that if you muzzle the animal with speech, it's considered action? Because his speech actually creates a physical effect in this world. It's not just mere speech, blowing air, so to speak, but his speech, the noise, created a reality, a physical reality, that the animal became muzzled. So that kind of speech is considered action because it leads to action. It leads to a physical effect. Just like when you do something physically, you change the physical object with which you're working. The same thing over here. Your speech did the same thing. So what's the difference if you do it with your hands or you do it with your mouth? It's still considered action. Now, in the case of Temurah, Rabbi Yochanan, remember Rabbi Yochanan says Temurah is not an exception to the rule, that it is considered yesh b'maisa, because there's also an effect. When a person makes Temurah, what does his verbal declaration that may the animal's holiness transfer from animal A to animal B? It does work. Animal B becomes holy. True, animal A remains holy, but animal B becomes holy. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan feels that Temurah is the same as chasima, as muzzling the animal. The speech created an effect, and therefore that kind of speech is considered to be an action. The Rambam, however, felt, as the Lachem Mishnah says, based on the different Gemaras, that that's not considered action. There's a fundamental difference between Temurah and chasima. In the case of chasima, the muzzling actually created, with the speech, actually created an effect of muzzling. Muzzling is the prohibition. The effect is a forbidden effect. Therefore, the speech is considered to be a forbidden effect, a forbidden action. In the case of Temurah, what is the effect that the speech caused? That the second animal became holy. But that's not the prohibition. The prohibition is you're not allowed to try to take the holiness of animal A away from it and have it devolve on animal B. But the fact that animal B became holy in and of itself is not the forbidden action. So therefore you can't say the speech created action. Yeah, it created action, it created an effect, but that effect is not a problem. The problem came about through speech alone. Without it, there's no action. The fact that he made this transfer, which is forbidden, does not involve any action, does not involve any effects. The effect that it does have, that's a permissible effect. The only problem that we still have left is the Rambam can't disagree with Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan felt that it does have an effect, that the fact that the second animal became holy is considered to be part of the prohibition. So how could the Rambam disagree with Rabbi Yochanan? So in the Sefer Chazon Heschel on the Tosefta gives a very good explanation, and he says that the Gemara in Temurah Daf Daled Amud Beis raises a question. How could we say Temurah has malchus, has lashes? There's a general rule, lav shenitik le'esa, negative commandment that's hinged, that's attached to a positive commandment, that does not incur lashes. For example, you're not allowed to take the chicks with the mother bird there. You have to send away the mother bird. If you did take it, it's a negative commandment, and there are lashes. But if you sent away, there would be lashes. But if you sent away the mother, then you correct the prohibition. Therefore, there are no lashes. If you did something to break the wings of the mother mother can't fly away, then there's no positive commandment anymore left. You don't have that option, so then there are lashes. So the Gemara in Temurah asks, how could you say that Temurah has lashes? It's a lav shenitik le'esa. And the Gemara answers that this is different because there are two lavin, there are two negative commandments here. And the positive can only weaken and moderate if there's one negative commandment. But if there are two, the lashes remain. Now the question is, how could you call, what is the positive commandment here? The positive commandment is that the second animal becomes holy. If, as Rabbi Yochanan maintains, that the second animal becomes holy is part of the prohibition, how could you call that the corrective positive commandment? It's not the corrective, it is part of the prohibition. So from this Gemara we see that authority in the Gemara disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan and maintains that the fact that the second animal becomes holy is not at all part of the prohibition. If it's not part of the prohibition, then what you did verbally does not have any effect. The effect that it does have is not a forbidden effect. So the Rambam is consistent with his ruling in Hilchos Chirus regarding the muzzling of the animal. In the case of muzzling the animal, the speech actually has a direct effect, and then the effect is what is forbidden. In Temurah, while it has an effect, the effect is not forbidden, and therefore it's not considered to be an action. Speech in and of itself is not action.